Hi, welcome back to another episode of Cold Stream Rod Shop. I'm Derek Fraser. In this week's video, we're still working on Ellie's 5-window coupe. In last week's video, we got the back section of the floor all welded in place. And in this week's video, what I think we're going to be doing is we will be tying in the sheet metal from underneath here to the floor. There's a couple little things we got to do there that I'll show you. We'll double check the fit of the gas tank. Now I put the gas tank in before. I know it clears, but we're still going to double check it. And then the other thing that's going on here is that the drip rails on this, someone cut them off. So normally the drip rail would go all the way down here. So I've got to make this back section of the drip rail before we start working on any of the other sheet metal in here. So anyways, follow along. We're fabricating some parts for a 32 5-window coupe. So today I was tidying up the floor that we put in from last week. There was a few other spots I had to weld in, and then I had to weld up the lower pan from up underneath, essentially drilling some holes. And I think you can see the spot welds there, or plug welds, I guess, because I drilled holes and then filled the holes in so that it looked like a spot weld, but it's really a plug weld. And then there was a couple spots along the sides there where I had to finish welding and take the clecos out, and then finish welding a few things along the side. The inner fender wells, we had to make a couple cuts, and there was a couple tears, so finished those up and everything, and then ground a few things smooth. Over on this side, there was a spot right here where this inner fender well was actually welded too tight up against the body, so I had made a big split here. So I welded a long triangular piece of sheet metal in there and cleaned it up, and again just tidied some of this stuff up a little bit so everything's all in and tight. And then the last thing, fit the gas tank in. Now this particular frame had the frame horns, new frame horns welded on. They weren't ground to size, so what I had to do, I think they were homemade ones, I'm not really sure, but I had to grind the inside of this so that the gas tank would fit up inside. And right now we've got pretty decent clearance inside. There isn't a lot anyways, so that when you put the gas line in the top of the tank, there's really not a lot of room. The last thing finished off, there was the floor pan. The other floor pan had this hole for gaining access to the fuel line, and I think the sending unit. There's a wire that goes to the sending unit. I think what that's hole for. On all the roadsters that I work with, these floor pans, we didn't have this hole, but I've come across a couple 5-window floors, and they've actually got this hole in it. So I put the hole back where it was, and we'll cover it up later. Maybe we'll make a little metal patch with a couple screws or something later on. But anyway, that's done for now. So next up, what I need to do is actually make the drip rails, because the drip rail should actually come all the way down here and then stop at this point. So this is the inner part of the drip rail, but for some reason they've cut the L-shaped portion off of this. So the plan is to get some 18 gauge, bend it on the brake, and then use the shrinker to form the shape. And then I'm going to have to make like a little dolly or something to be able to round this edge over. So anyways, we'll step you through that process, and we're going to make one for this side and one for that side and weld it in. So my time lapse didn't go to plan. I didn't quite show you in detail what I was trying to do. So instead of doing it again, I'll show you well, you would have seen the time lapse, but I'm going to show you essentially what I was trying to do, which was to basically take a flat piece of metal like this. I put it on the brake. I bent it to a 90 degree. And then I took that 90-degree piece over here to the stretcher, and I stretched this one edge until it was curved. Now I kept going back and forth to the car until I had the right arc into it. So basically imagine a longer piece like this, which would extend from this point to the bottom. I just kept stretching the one edge until this piece followed this curve. So then we have a piece that's at a right angle, but then the other complication is we have to round this edge over. Now I think my time lapse for that actually showed up pretty good, because essentially what I had to find an anvil or something that's the right shape in order to form this edge on. So what I found was that one of my dollies was just the right shape on one edge. So I took the dolly and I put it over here in the vise. And then hopefully what you saw from the time lapse, I then took the hammer and then rounded this edge down. So I just slowly kept working it along here and then knocking this edge down till it's rounded. So if we go back over in the bench over here, I can show you what I have. I've got two pieces right now that have the rounded edge like we want. Now, what I've got to do is, now which one is which? I think that this one, yeah. So what I'm going to do now is basically fit that piece, just trim it, trim this edge, and then what I'll do is I'll weld that in. We'll sand this edge, and then I'll trim this edge so that it looks like this one, so it'll look like a continuous drip edge. So I'll do that next, and we'll show you when it's done. So there's the first drip rail welded in. I've got a nice continuous line here going down. I ground this section here to the same width as it was on the top because I left a little extra onto it. And then, you know, with the grinding wheel, I took out most of the stretching marks on there. So I have a little bit of, you can see a little bit of a weld mark on the inside there, but more than likely what we're going to do, we're going to take a little bit of seam sealer and just seam seal that weld, because ultimately these welds are porous, even at the best of times. Anytime you're welding old metal to new metal, and probably most of us, when we weld new metal to new metal, we're going to have some porosity into it. So we do want these drip rails to be drip free, as in, like, you know, no holes into it. So seam sealer would be the best thing in here. I guess if we had absolutely perfect metal, we could probably TIG weld it together, but that unfortunately is not what we're dealing with. So anyways, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Going to take that piece, I'm going to trim it to fit this here. I'll dress up some of the metal here so it's cleaner for the weld, and we'll get that one welded in too. So there's a second drip rail welded in. Didn't do time lapse onto it. You guys have seen me weld many times before. Basically had to climb inside of the back of the car and kind of weld upside down. I will probably come in here and dress it up just a little bit, take the high spots off of the welds, but I needed to get enough penetration there so that there was a minimum amount of pinholes. We'll smooth that out with a rotary file, and then, like I said, that way once the car is all done, we'll just put a tiny little skim of seam sealer in there, and it'll work just fine. I've got the edge all trimmed up and rolled over a little bit, had to tweak it a little bit, and then it's all trimmed up in behind. Next up, what I need to do, I mentioned this already, there's a support that goes right here. That's the Roadster one, and I've mentioned it before. There's a 1/2 inch difference between the 5-window and a roadster one. It's a simple little piece. We'll bend that up tomorrow night and put it in. And then there's another piece that goes across the back here. I'm not really sure what it's called, a ring gutter or something, but it goes straight across here. It's shaped like this. This is an old piece of one that I made a while ago when I did the other two 5-window coupes, but it essentially comes in here like this. So we'll make a couple of those up. I'm going to make an extra one to put up on a shelf, and I'll make one for this too. So we'll get at that tomorrow night. That was the quick and dirty on how to make the support for the back of the lower deck lid. As I said before, the one we needed to make is a 1/2 inch longer than the 32 Roadster. I'd made drawings probably a couple of years ago. They were okay drawings. Went off of those. I knew what size blank to make was 8.5 by 4.5, and essentially just drew it out on a piece of paper. Started off with forming the bead there, and then rounding the top off with a little, I don't know if I still have it here, probably put it away, but used a hammer there and a piece of pipe. Oh, there it is there. With a 1/2 moon, basically to finish off the top of the bead to make it look nice. Not going to see it anyways, but nevertheless kind of wanted to make it look good. The next step was to bend these edges over on the brake. And because I do have a finger brake, and I could probably move my fingers out of the way, but it was actually just as easy to take this piece of metal over onto the vise here, and then basically bend these tabs over and bend that bottom flange over. So right now I haven't tried this, but I'm going to go try and stick it in here. It should actually, well, it's a little tight there. I'm going to probably make a little bit of an adjustment on this bottom here. We'll bring it in, and then we'll weld it in place, and I'll show you the end product. There's the deck lid support all welded in place. Did plug welds into the sheet metal, and basically what that does, it supports the back, the lower deck lid, and keeps some rigidity to it. Now, like before, there was a little bit of flex into it, but now, like between the stiffener that we made previously right here and this support piece, it basically, the whole back of the lower deck lid now has complete support. And we're just trying to keep it the same way that, as close as we can anyways. It's our version of the way Henry Ford did it, except for we're doing plug welds, and in many cases he did spot welds and he did rivets. It depends on which piece. I'm not sure how this one went together, whether it originally used rivets or spot welds, but anyways, we did plug welds, and we're putting together to make it look as much like original as we can. This is the piece that we've got to make next. It's relatively straightforward. It takes a few bends and whatnot. There's a bit of a bead here, a couple holes to drill, a little tab we have to form, and then there's a lip that goes right around the back here. So I'm going to lay that out. We've got the dimensions from when I did this before. We'll lay it in a piece of metal, and I'll step you through the process of bending it. So here's all my hen scratches from making this piece the last time. I laid out in a piece of paper how to lay out the blank with the dimensions for all the holes and the bends and the beads, and I had some other drawings I made up for what the angles were and whatnot. And anyways, I can actually decipher what's on there. Probably need to make a little bit better drawing. When I made these, I really wasn't planning on making more of them or a bunch of them, but anyway, we're going to make some more. So here is a blank all laid out. So all of, I don't know if I can get a pen here. All of this has to be cut away. Now, it's not that easy to cut away. Have to use a combination of like a mini grinder and a cutoff wheel and a file to basically clean up all of this material. So I've got one already done. I didn't set the time lapse up, but essentially I used the cutoff wheel to notch in wherever I could, and I kept angling in to nib away at the little pieces, and then I took a couple files there to square things up. So right now, this blank, the stage we're at right now, what I'm going to do is there's a bead that goes, a raised section that goes up here. It stops here, and then it goes to the other side. So I'll set the time lapse up for that. I'll run the beads, and then I'll make the bends. The last thing will be to drill holes in these tabs and then bend them up. And then there's another hole in this face to do. So I'll set the time lapse up for the beading and the bending, and we're going to make this piece up. So there's a piece all bent up. We've got the tabs bent on the side with some 1/4" holes. Now these are 5/8 inch diameter holes, and there'll be like a little rubber plug that's going to mount in those ultimately that the deck lid will rest on. This bead here, there's a couple holes that will get drilled into this. And then the deck lid latch, or the catch, I guess, will ultimately fit in this place in the trunk. But I've put this in a couple times now, and it's basically ready to fit into the car. But that's how you make this piece. So there's a lower drip tray fitted in place. It's not permanently installed just yet. There's a few screws that we have to put in place to put it there. There's a screw that comes from behind that goes into the drip rail on either side. There's a screw that goes here on these tabs that I made on either side. And there's usually 2 screws that go straight down here into a small L-shaped piece of metal that I haven't made yet. Ran out of time here. Unfortunately, we covered a little bit of stuff here on Ellie's coupe. I normally would do a little bit more, but I was over working on Brenda's Roadster a bit. I'll be able to show you what we did on that next week. But this was what we could show you this week for Ellie's coupe. Basically fixing the drip rails, making the lower drip lip drip tray, and then it was the deck lid support underneath that we welded in place. So anyways, we are making more progress with it. Things are tightening up, completing more pieces, and we're going to carry on working on this next week as well. So that's it for this week at Coldstream Rod Shop. Please like, share, tag, and subscribe. Send me your comments, and everybody come back next week and see what we're up to. Take care. Thanks.